Welcome to the Let's Talk About podcast, where we help you to have life's most difficult and challenging conversations. We talk about the things that most people avoid, the subjects that affect us on a day-to-day basis, but for some reason we find them difficult and challenging to talk about. We'll give you tips and strategies on how to have those conversations and support networks at the end of each podcast if you need them. One of the biggest lessons I learnt as a hostage and crisis negotiator were that we all have a story. And in each one of our stories, there are lessons for us all to learn. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Let's Talk About. And today we're going to talk about a subject close to many people's hearts, including my own. Let's talk about how to negotiate with your teenagers. I fell into this kind of accidentally, but in my speaking and training career, I have been asked on numerous occasions, too many to count now, how do I use the same skills to have conversations with my teenager? I don't know what's happened to my teenager, don't know who they are anymore. And also, as a step parent, I became a negotiator at the same time that I met Meg, who came into my life when she was about 6 and I was in my early 40s. And I used to practice my negotiation skills on her all the time from a very early age. And that definitely continued into her teens. And so I'm going to share some of the lessons that I've learned being a step parent to a teenager. I've definitely been a teenager and I hated it. My sister used to say I always looked angry as a teenager and then showed me a photograph proving her point. So yes, I accept I was a very angry teenager. I found it quite difficult and challenging, actually, being a teenager for a number of reasons. I wasn't very kind to my mum, and I'd like you to start reflecting on how you were and how you were parented and what that looked like for you and those bits of parenting that you now bring in to parenting your teen. The other thing I think that is important to remember is this, and that's you're probably going through some sort of grieving process because they used to sit next to you on the settee. They used to hold your hand. They used to want a big hug and a cuddle. And they also wanted you to tell them and guide them and show them what to do. And they were very willing to listen to your opinion. And suddenly we find as they enter the teenage years, this all changes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this happens. And then I'm going to talk about having some strategies in place for you when you feel that you are being challenged, that they are being rude and obnoxious. You only have to read the teens pages on Facebook to see that many, many parents are really struggling at this time, and you're not alone. Parenting is incredibly difficult. I always say I was a great parent until I had a child in my life. And then suddenly I realised how difficult it was. And on reflection, and I have apologised to my mum for my behaviour as a teenager, but on reflection, as you get older and you look back, you go, oh, actually, I wasn't particularly nice at this time. I also feel that sometimes we create this big thing about being a teenager, you know, oh yeah, teenagers, oh yeah, good luck with that, and all of those sorts of things, those conversations that we have. And remember, our young people are listening to those conversations and they will pick up on the language that we use. So let's have a look at what's really happening. Why suddenly do we not see our teenager for ages? A quick example from my own personal life. I remember sitting at home, and it feels like one day it was this and the next day it was this. But Meg used to always sit with us, always want to watch TV with us, be part of everything that we're doing. Then suddenly, and it seemed to be when she joined secondary school, suddenly she wasn't there anymore. And I'd be like, where's Meg? And she's in her room. She's in her room a lot. Meg, do you want to come down and watch TV? No. Okay. Meg, we're doing this. Do you want to come? No. And of course, it starts to discover the online world, which we all have to live with, unfortunately, at the same time. There's good and bad and everything upside with most things, downside with most things. So we have to manage that and live with that as well. So thinking about boundaries. So why is this happening? Why is that young person suddenly changed dramatically. Well, their brain is totally different. It's forming, their identity is forming, and identity is becoming really key for them. Who are they becoming? Who are they? And the other thing that's happening with the brain is that there's lots going on. Lots going on around what's growing, what's not growing, what's being shorn, what's not being shorn, and the emotions that go with all of that as well. And there is a lot of overload on. There's a great book called Blame My Brain, which I found really useful as a step parent of a teenager. Blame My Brain just helps you to understand how the brain is working. And we know that that prefrontal cortex is very much under construction, and that's where we make our decisions. We also know that research with new MRI scans on the brain shows that it doesn't really fully develop until our mid-20s. And with young men, it's a little bit later. And that's why, sadly, so many young men die in risky activities or do things, and we're thinking that is too risky. Why are you doing that? Because that part of the brain hasn't quite formed. They're also highly sensitive, and this is completely normal. So when you put all of that together, what you generally get is a very, very quick reaction. Now, let's be honest, as adults, we are also very quick to react. And often that can cause some of those conflict conversations. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, because one of the things I learned as a hostage and crisis negotiator, especially, I've probably known this for a long time, but I still try and do it, is that we can't change people. So the only thing that we can do is have some control over how we choose to react, or can we press the big pause button and respond? Because I don't know about you, but if I react to Meg when she's in that highly sensitive area, then I'm going to get a reaction back. And then it becomes that big conversation that probably didn't really need to happen in the first place. So me as an adult, as a parent, I have to take responsibility for that as well. And often I think and this is just my belief system, I'm not saying it's true for everybody, but often I think we as the adults, we have a very high expectation on young people, and we don't accept responsibility. We look to blame, so we don't accept the responsibility of how we're reacting in the moment. And we really do react, let's be honest. I include myself in that, by the way. So we know they've got high emotional intensity, but the other thing that's going on is they've got a really strong independence drive. They want to spread their wings and fly from the nest, and we don't want to let them go. We don't hold them back, because the world out there is scary. And we know, because we've got our experience of how scary it can be and what might happen, and we want to just protect. And of course, they don't want that. They want to fight. They want to go out and get experiences, have independence. And of course, that often causes conflict. I don't know about you. As a teenager, I knew absolutely everything. And of course, I didn't know very much. But I'm learning and developing and growing. And that's our job as adults, is to help them to learn, develop and grow into independent adults who leave the nest and have their own life and have a good life. So what can we do as parents with our teenagers? So the first thing I really want to talk about is something called the red zone. This is where we get arguing, door slamming, maybe withdrawal, definitely some sarcasm going on in there. And I'm sure that you can relate to that. And that's just the adults. I'm joking, but I'm not really joking, because it can be us. We can argue back. We react. We start arguing back. We start stomping around the house. We might withdraw and not set the boundaries because it's just too overwhelming to deal with. And we probably do use sarcasm sometimes with our young people. So it's about watching for the red zone for your teenager, but also watching for the red zone for yourself, because we can't control the reaction we're going to get from them. So what we're looking for is, how can we be more self-aware? Now, for me, I know that my reaction starts in my shoulders. I get really tight across the shoulders, and that is my first warning signal. Love to tell you I'm able to grab it every time, but of course that is a lie, and I can't. But I'm more aware of it. I'm more aware that this might actually be a time for me to walk away, rather than to get sucked in to an argument about something as important as who hasn't emptied the dishwasher, why is your room a complete mess? All of those things that go on. Now, of course, that's the low end of the scale. We have the upper end of the scale where people can be violent. Our teenagers might be being violent to us. And then we have choices to make. So remember, we always have choices to make. And sometimes those choices are really hard because we have an emotional attachment to the young person. So we have to think about that as well. If they're at the other end of the scale of taking drugs, abusing alcohol, committing crime, running away. Where is your line in the sand? What are your expectations about yourself and how you'll manage that? Because they will do what they're going to do. So we have to have a plan for it. So first of all, let's pause. Before we react, let's pause. So we recognize I get it across the shoulders. You might be the same. You might feel your heartbeat quicker. And there's loads of reasons why this happens. We'll go into that in another podcast. But a lot of it is that confrontation of you are questioning my parenting skills, my style, my beliefs, all of those. Authority, you're pushing back on authority, which a lot of teenagers do because they want independence. They want to start finding out more. Oh, and by the way, how they look in front of their friends is far more important than what you say to them right here, right now, in this moment of time. So it's about understanding that and recognizing it as well. You know, those fights and those arguments you have, perhaps about time on screen, you always get back that that's not fair. That's like fairness is a really high value, by the way. So you probably have said that to yourself when you feel that you're being treated unfairly, but that's not fair. It's a really strong, high value. Research is now showing that's a very high value, especially in young people with ADHD, that you'll push back on that fairness and that integrity really strongly. And so when we feel that we're not being treated the same as other people or fairly, we give a reaction. And that might be screen time, how long you allow them to have screen time, bedtime, what are your rules, coming back from being out on an evening with friends, what time is around that. And you will have your line in your sand even around what those times are. And we can have the directive authoritative, you will be back at this time, or we can have conversations that are more collaborative around here's the time that I'm giving you. I notice your reaction is pushback. I'm wondering why that is. It's probably because your other friends are being allowed to stay out later. Let's have a conversation about it. So we get the reaction, right, I'd like you to be back at 10:30. Oh, that's so unfair. Or a reaction of that sort. So, okay, I've got a reaction. Now I can choose to either react back and go, well, that's the time it is, depending on how I'm feeling, whether I'm tired or emotional or I'm feeling stressed, whatever that might be. Or I want you back at that because I want to protect you. There'll be lots going on in your adult brain. Or we can reflect that back and say, you sound like you feel like I'm treating you unfairly around that. Might not get a response. And then we just ask a big open question. Okay, what is it that you, or how do you feel I'm treating you unfairly? And then they're more likely to say, well, all the others don't have to be home till 11. Right, okay. So it feels then that if I get you to be at home at 10:30, then that has an impact on your friendship, and you are worried about how you're going to look to them. And so now we're having a collaborative, calm conversation rather than a reactionary conversation. Now that's up to you, of course, with your lines in the sand and where you have your boundaries and what that looks like. But we know that collaboration works better in all negotiations, including the ones with the young people in your life. If your young person is reacting, rather than matching their tone, so perhaps you're going to meet sarcasm with sarcasm, anger with anger, frustration with frustration, whatever it might be, we know that if we can keep calm and logical and reflect back in a calm, logical tone, we're more likely to be able to influence than if we meet and match that aggression. When we label the emotion that we're hearing, we might get it wrong, but we're going to label it and say, oh, you're frustrated. Now, the reason with adults, we'll often say, you sound frustrated, because we might be getting it wrong, and the adult will respond, I'm not frustrated, I'm angry. With young people, we're still helping them to find their way and navigate those emotions. So we're going to say, you're frustrated. What exactly is it that's making you so frustrated? Or you feel like I'm controlling you. And we just do it in a non-patronizing, non-lecture manner. Don't need to give them a 5, 10 monologue around how parenting should be. And we often do. We just go on and on and on. Sometimes we have to, I'm guilty of this myself, and we have to stop, line in the sand. Remember that your attachment and your reassurance also matters. So if there's something big going on, just reassure that young person in your life, that teenager, but just by saying, look, we've got this. Okay, we'll sort this out. Because most things you can sort out. But if your teenager doesn't trust you enough to have that conversation because they're fearful of the reaction they're going to get, they're less likely to bring the problem to you, and they'll go and find another way of solving it, whatever that might be. I know some of you don't want to hear this. I didn't want to hear this because you're like, no, that can't be right. But unfortunately, or fortunately, it's true, because they are preparing themselves to flee the nest and go out into the big wide world. Still lead, still have your boundaries, with minimal lectures, of course, but still have your boundaries. And we talk about boundaries in a time of calm. So we don't set boundaries when people are really angry, because all that happens then is they don't hear it. They'll push back on the boundary, that you'll get more of a reaction. And because their brain, it's called window of tolerance, because their brain is now in that emotional state, they're not going to hear the instructions that are going on. So we set the boundaries in times of calm, times of peace, when we're out of the red zone and into the green zone, and we'll just have those conversations. It might be that you have them really early doors. Maybe they're going into the next year at school and there's going to be social events. And so we talk about it then. What are your feelings around time when you go to a party? And we start having those adult conversations and start collaborating. And the reason we do this is because we are helping them to become adults. And then if we do have a reaction conversation, if we do have a big argument, then we need to repair that, because we're living with these people. So you can have a big argument with somebody down the road and walk away, but with the young person in your life, you can't. They're there with you day to day. So we have a repair conversation. We let everything settle down. Maybe even overnight, we let it all settle down overnight. And then the next day, when we have those meetings with the young people in our life, I say meetings like that because, okay, on the podcast, you can't see what I'm doing, of course, because I'm crossing my hands over. On the video, you'll be able to see it. But we have meetings, where we cross on the stairs, or we meet in the kitchen, or we're reaching for the same cereal, whatever it might be. So we can have those repair conversations, and we just talk about it. Last night, I noticed this. You were frustrated and angry at me because I said you had to be home at a particular time. Just help me understand that a little bit more. And then wait for the reply. Again, no lecture, no pushing your point of view and your opinion, because we are really good at giving an opinion, even if it's not asked for. And the key difference with teenagers rather than young people as they reach that teenage is to let them develop and to influence them rather than trying to control. Because if we try to control, we know that teenagers are brilliant at finding ways of doing things that we've asked them not to do when we're not there to help, guide, and support. What actually happens is our authority just becomes slightly different. It becomes more collaborative, more steady, less dominant, and that just helps. So a great way I heard it described the other day is when your young person is under 8, what we're doing is we're helping them to calm, we're helping them to recognize different emotions. When they're 8 to 12, we help to calm them and teach them, because they have more cognitive space to help to be allowed to that. And then when they're in their teenage years, we calm and collaborate. So remember that red zone. We can't do anything in the red zone. If we react, the red zone will keep being the red zone. So sometimes it's up to us, the adult, the parent, to walk away, to come back to the conversation. We set boundaries early where it's nice and peaceful. Even with the young people in your life, when you talk about bedtime, you'll get a very different reaction response if you say to them, right, it's bedtime now. They're like, whoa, hang on a second. What do you mean it's bedtime now? Even if they know they go to bed at 7 o'clock every night, by the way. So we start the conversation early doors, and we start to have conversations, maybe even at tea time, right? We've got a couple of hours before you go to bed at 7 o'clock. What do you want to do? This is the routine. We're going to have a bath, we're going to do a teeth, and then we're going to go to bed. We'll have one story. And we just set the boundaries early doors. It just helps everybody to remain calm and have better conversations. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm in my reactionary brain, I'm not very good at taking on information or having a very good conversation. And the other thing that we can do as adults, of course, is that we can apologize. Sometimes we mess up. I definitely mess up. Sometimes react. Sometimes I say stuff that I shouldn't say. Sometimes I'm tired and grumpy. I even said to Meg, she's 19 now, the other day on Sunday, I said, look, Meg, I'm apologising now because I know that I'm grumpy today and I'm not really sure why. And we've done it in a time of calm. And she laughed because she gets it, because she knows she can be grumpy sometimes as well. It just makes us human. And it's okay to be human. I hope that helps you. Just some ideas around understanding yourself better, understanding your teenager's brain a little bit more, and then just having some tools that will help you to have better conversations. And I wrote this in my Friday email a few weeks ago. I was having a conversation with my sister. My niece is, oh gosh, she's 21 this year. I can't believe it. Where's that time gone? So my niece is 21, and my sister said, you know, when your teenager wants to talk to you, because I was talking about doing the podcast and working with parents around, with teenagers, she said, when your teenager wants to talk to you, you drop everything. You drop everything because it means they really want to talk to you. And if you walk away from that conversation, if you're on your phone, if you're not showing them that you love and care about them in that moment in time, that is a moment in time missed, an opportunity missed. And when I reflected on my life with Meg, I was like, yeah, actually, there are times when Meg has really needed to talk to me. And it's about creating that space, that safe space. So they know it's safe to raise any conversation with you, even if it's really difficult for them, because they're undergoing lots of new experiences, that whole friendship group thing, especially with girls in secondary school. I'd forgotten all about that. And then you've got that changing and development, all the hormones, all the sex drive that comes with being a teenager. All of it's natural, by the way. It all comes from the primitive brain. So it's important to have those open and honest conversations, even if we don't want to. I'm not saying any of this that you're doing is right or wrong. I'm just giving you some suggestions that you're very welcome to try and see if they help you in your relationship with your teenagers. You're not on your own. I know it might feel like a very lonely place sometime, but there are lots of other people going through this. So keep tuned for some more parenting bits that we're going to go through. I've got a couple of very excellent, exciting guests lined up to have these conversations. And let's talk about how chuffing hard it is to be a parent and what it's like when we're really feeling it and feeling alone and isolated, and the young person in our life is giving us a really tough time. Let's talk about that. For now, take care of yourselves. Please reach out if I can help you in any other way. And thank you again for listening. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. I hope you found it useful. There is a list of helplines that you can use at the end of the transcript. Please reach out to somebody if you need to talk about anything that has affected you today. Please like, share, and subscribe. We're trying to make a big difference in the world, and we'd really appreciate your help. Thank you for listening. Take care.